Imagine for a second a world where there is no too big to fail. A world where the processes that exist don't automatically produce waste. A world where competition isn't loathed, isn't something to be crushed. We're going to kill our competition. Imagine a world where knowledge isn't lost over time. Rather, it's codified in a way that every generation has the knowledge of the generation before. I don't have to imagine it. To me, that world exists every single time I go outside and I look up in the sky, or I go out in the middle of the night, or I go down by the river. I don't even have to go past my own backyard. Now, I'll admit, that's my world. I see the world a little differently. I see nuance. And I didn't come to that superpower by having 16 degrees and going to school and all that sort of stuff. I skipped most of my high school bird watching. And so, bird watching, of all things, has given me this superpower. I want to share with you. That's me. I'm the cute one on the end. My life in bird watching, and it started about that age. And I'm going to share with you 5 epiphanous events that helped shape the way that I see the world. That helped shape the way that I see business. It helped shape the way that I see my place. And it started back there when that little 7-year-old kid was going to go sledding with his 2 older brothers. Joe, you go down this side of the hill. Well, when they weren't looking, I said, I'm big enough to go down Devil's Backbone. And I went down and I dodged the first tree. By the way, this thing is like just landmines all over the place, trees, ramps, you know how the kids set it up. And I go down, first tree, second tree, third tree, boom. Oh. I rolled over. I could taste my own blood. I knew my lip, I thought I lost a tooth. And I was about to cry. And I'd look up and see that. Apparently my face had scared a squirrel out of a tree. And an owl, unbeknownst to me, I hadn't seen it, was perched up ready for that squirrel. And as soon as it hit the ground, it swooped down with talons as big as my 7-year-old face, swoops down and picks up that squirrel. And owl takes it up in the tree, and I stood there. I knew 2 things pretty quickly. As I watched that owl eat that squirrel, number 1, I am in not nearly as bad a shape as that squirrel is, so stop complaining. And the second thing was, I have never been that hungry. That owl ate the whole damn thing. I mean, I watched, imagine you're a 7-year-old and you're just like, oh my goodness. It ate the whole thing. It ate the eyes, it ate the toes, it ate the tail, it ate the bones. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was wasted. When I watched that whole process and I go back to it, I remember thinking how efficient everything was. There was no wasted energy. There was nothing wasted, not one thing. See, my business, when I went into business, helped large companies, Fortune 500s, Fortune 50s, reduce their environmental footprint, reduce waste. Why is it that in our industrial process, in the paradigm we live, we just think that we make something, and when we make something, something comes outside of that, that's called waste. Does it need to be that way? No. In fact, in our own lives, how many people put out trash last week? Congratulations, you put out more waste last week than 22 General Motors plants have put out in the last 4 years. Because they rethought their process. They said this doesn't need to produce waste. See, biology teaches that systems, good systems, don't produce waste. That was an epiphanous moment for me. Another epiphany came, maybe 20 years old. We're driving down the road, and all of a sudden, I see something fly out of this woodlot, and I knew at that moment, a big black bird with a bright red head. I said, holy mackerel. I said to this young lady I'm dating in the front car, I said, holy mackerel, it's Dryacopus pileatus. And I find my binoculars, and I watched Dryacopus pileatus, the pileated woodpecker, just pounding on that tree. So I'm watching this bird, and I looked at him, and I think to myself, has anything been so perfect for a job? See, if you look at the toes of that pileated woodpecker, you notice that the woodpecker has 2 toes on front, 2 toes on bottom. Most birds have 3 and 1, 3 up front, 1 on bottom. Why? So it can clamp that tree. Now, when we make a fist, if you make a fist, to hold that fist, you have to expend energy. Your muscles have to be in tetany. That bird, its tendons are ratcheted. It spends no energy to hold that grip. Same thing for an owl. We have 3 layers of protection around our head, our brain. Woodpeckers have 4. Those tail feathers are not really feathers, they're recoiling springs. They put that butt right up against that tree like that, and those feathers are pressed, and when they slam their head forward, that recoil action comes back, engages those springs so they don't spend energy pounding that tree. Now, when you think of the perfectness of that design, the lack of redundancy, that woodpecker doesn't have anything it doesn't need, but it has everything it does. Biology doesn't over-engineer. It doesn't have redundancies it doesn't need. So when I started my business, I started looking for form and function. Think about that in your own line of work, in your own business, in your own enterprise. Okay, is everything in a place, and does everything have a place? Is everything designed for the purpose that it's supposed to be? And we get far afield. I get that. We start dabbling in other things. But the problem is that we take our processes and we over-engineer them to things that they don't need to be. Biology doesn't make that mistake. It's efficient. So a third epiphany happened. It was probably in 1994. I was down in South America working for the Department of Energy. I was doing some bird watching on the side of a mountain, and I happened to see this little guy, the brown violet ear. It was the first hummingbird that I saw that day. It was one of 30 species that I happened to see that day. 30 species on one mountain. In the whole eastern part of the United States, there is but one species of hummingbird. But on the side of a mountain, I saw 30. And I thought to myself, how does this happen? I'll tell you how it happens. See, the brown violet ear is perfectly designed to fit into a flower. One flower, one species of flower. At one time, millions of years ago, there was probably one type of flower and one type of hummingbird. And then what happened? One individual had just a slightly longer bill. And that gene, that genetic makeup, got passed along because guess what there was? A few flowers that had extra long throats. And so that competitive advantage ultimately yielded a different species, one that had a slightly longer bill. And you know what that yielded? A different species of flower You know what happened after that? A different species of hummingbird. And more flowers and more hummingbirds. We see this divergence. We see this speciation among competition. And yet, in today's business world, I hear this all the time. It's time to crush the competition. We don't value competition. And in fact, what we need to understand in biology, competition is welcome because it helps me identify a niche, a specific niche, something that I can excel at. What happens instead is we try to, it seems like in today's markets, what we try to do is get rid of species, consolidate. And when an ecosystem becomes too dependent on one species, what happens when that species gets in trouble? 2 names, Lehman Brothers. When we take our ecosystems and make them less diverse, when we don't welcome competition, then what's going to happen is we're going to have situations like we had in 2007, 2008. We're going to have too big to fails. Don't hate your competition. They're helping you grow your beak. And as a side note, one thing that I took a great deal of pride in is that when we had our company, we'd have a company Christmas party. We invited all of our competition, and at least a third of the people that showed up was our competition. And I thanked them because they made me better. A fourth Epiphanous event that I'd like to tell you about was really interesting to me. I was a senior in high school, and I was very excited because I had seen a male great horned owl, Bobo virginianus, in case you were interested, was hanging out by close to our house and down by the river. And I was really excited because I thought maybe it was going to nest. And sure enough, it got a mate, and I was watching him. I'm a little voyeuristic in that way. Anyway, I was watching him. I said, oh, they're going to mate. This is awesome. And it was been a mild winter. It was a mild winter, so I thought for sure I was going to have 2 or 3 baby owlets to watch. Baby owls are called owlets. Anyway, comes to hatching time. I go, oh, they hatched. And you know what I saw? Just one. I know, don't feel sorry for it. He's fine. But just one. And I said, how did this happen? How could this be? Mild winter, perfect nesting situation. But I remembered that we had a flood. We had a flood, and that flood probably killed a lot of the food that owl would typically eat. Now, this is an exogenous factor. This is something that's external to the owl, okay? It's eating high on the hog for a couple months, and then all of a sudden there's no food. And it, by a hormonal response through a feedback loop to something that happened external to it, a feedback loop told it, mama should only lay 1 egg instead of 3, because even though mama and dada can survive, if you have 3, none of them will live. So we think about this, right? Feedback loops are extraordinarily important in biology, but we don't use leading indicators nearly as well as what we should in business. So in my business, I always tried to build leading indicators, tried to listen to the environment around me, listen to the information that was coming in, and have feedback loops that could help me adjust so that I don't have 3 new offices open. I don't put 3 new retail outlets in a market that can really only sustain 1. We gotta listen to our environment. We gotta listen to the feedback loops. Biology does it perfectly. What can we learn from that? The last epiphany happened later when I was an adult. I was in my late 20s, the very earliest, and we had embarked upon a restoration project in this prairie/wetland area. And a couple of years after the planting, I'm walking, and I hear, and I said, and it said, and I said, you don't speak sparrow? Okay, let me translate. It said, hi, I'm Amadramus Hensly. And I said, holy, you're the Henslow sparrow? It said, yeah. I said, how did you get here? How did you know to be here? And it said, I've always known to be here. That bird hadn't been seen in that area for about 100 years since we drained the little river. And yet, by the way, after I did my little, and it's a two-note call, actually. When I made that call, it wasn't one Henslow sparrow. There were two. And I watched him, and they were making a nest. It knew to nest there. It hadn't been seen there in 100 years. How did you know to be there? And it says to me, it's on my DNA. See, I don't trust information to an individual. I put it on a gene. So the bird took important information and codified it in a way that humans aren't used to. In our organizations, when Sally leaves and she takes all that important information with her, we lose it. Birds don't do that. Hundreds of years ago, that was a good place to nest. So when I'm thinking about places to nest, I got to make sure I check that out. Many generations have passed, and yet that bird knew that that was a good place. And when we rebuilt it, they came. How do we treat information in our organizations? Do we codify it on our DNA? Do we standardize our work? Do we make sure that everybody knows if they have information that's valuable to the organization that we put it somewhere where it's safe? Or do we let it walk out the door with each passing generation? I proffer to you that most organizations, it's the latter, and they should study the Henslow sparrow. You see, birds, to me, biology, to me, has informed the way that I see the world. All too often when there's problems with businesses, we look and we try to find the answer in other businesses. And I say to you, the answers to so many of our problems in business and life and our understanding of systems, the answers aren't there. The answers are in biology, and I found my answers in birds. You go outside and find your answers. That's where they are. Thank you.